Hi guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing a video all about the Bailey's Prize long list that was announced at the end of last week. The Bailey's Prize is an annual prize awarded to female writers of full-length novels that have been published in the UK and written in English, but the writers can be of any nationality. So there's a £30,000 prize for the award, and the long list is normally published in March, and then the shortlist is published in June. So previous winners of the prize have been people like Zadie Smith and Rose Tremaine, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Ali Smith, so some really good female writers. Now, like I said, the long list was announced for the prize for this year last week, and there are 16 titles on the list. So what I'm going to do is go through each one, give sort of a brief summary of what it's about, and then at the end of the video give my thoughts on which of those I found the most interesting, that I feel like I want to pick up and give a go myself. None of these on the list I've read, and only one of them I own in print copy. So I'll probably wait, unless something really piques my interest, I'll probably wait until the shortlist comes out and pick up all of the shortlist and read those. So let's get started on the long list. The first title on the list is a book called Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. And this is published by Canongate, and the summary for this says, "There are things even love can't do. If the burden is too much and stays too long, even love bends, cracks, comes close to breaking, and sometimes does break. But even when it's in 1,000 pieces around your feet, that doesn't mean it's no longer love. Yejide is hoping for a miracle for a child. It is all her husband wants, all her mother-in-law wants, and she has tried everything. Arduous pilgrimages, medical consultations, dances with prophets, appeals to God. But when her in-laws insist upon a new wife, it is too much for Yejide to bear. It will lead to jealousy, betrayal and despair. Unravelling against the social and political turbulence of 80s Nigeria, Stay With Me sings with the voices, colours, joys and fears of its surroundings. Ayobami Adebayo weaves a devastating story of the fragility of married love, the undoing of family, the wretchedness of grief, and the all-consuming bonds of motherhood. It is a tale about our desperate attempts to save ourselves and those we love from heartbreak." So got a bit of literary fiction there. Sounds that it's going to be a story about family, that it's going to be a story about culture, about women and women's expectations in a particular culture, and that sounds really, really good. So like I said, that was published by Canongate. Second on the list is a book called The Power by Naomi Alderman, and this was published by Viking. And summary of this is, in The Power, the world is a recognisable place. There's a rich Nigerian kid who larks around the family pool, a foster girl whose religious parents hide their true nature, a local American politician, a tough London girl from a tricky family. But something vital has changed, causing their lives to converge with devastating effect. Teenage girls now have immense physical power. They can cause agonising pain and even death. And with this small twist of nature, the world changes utterly. This extraordinary novel by Naomi Alderman, a Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year and Granta Best of British Writer, is not only a gripping story of how the world would change if power was in the hands of women, but also exposes with breathtaking daring our contemporary world. So again, we've got quite a lot about culture in there, we've got quite a lot about women and women's rights, and a story that seems to turn gender expectations on its head. So that is The Power by Naomi Alderman. The next book on the list is Hagseed by Margaret Atwood, and this was published by Hogarth. And the summary for this is, when Felix is disposed as artistic director of the Make She Weg Theatre Festival by his devious assistant and long-time enemy, his production of The Tempest is cancelled and he is heartbroken. Reduced to a life of exile in rural southern Ontario, accompanied only by his fantasy daughter Miranda, who died 12 years ago, Felix devises a plan for retribution. Eventually he takes a job teaching literacy through theatre to the prisoners at the nearby Burgess Correctional Institution, and is making a modest success of it when an auspicious star places his enemies within his reach. With the help of their own interpretations, digital effects, and the talents of a professional actress and choreographer, the Burgess Correctional players prepare to video their Tempest. Not surprisingly, they view Caliban as the character with whom they have most in common. However, Felix has another twist in mind, and his enemies are about to find themselves taking part in an interactive and illusion-ridden version of the Tempest that will change their lives forever. But how will Felix deal with his invisible Miranda's decision to take a part in the play? So I know this is part of a collection where they're taking, contemporary writers are taking Shakespearean stories and rewriting them for a modern audience, and this is Margaret Atwood's version of The Tempest. So I have kind of been intrigued by it before. I've only read a couple of books by Margaret Atwood before, and I really liked The Handmaid's Tale. So we'll see with that one. Next one on the list is a book called Little Deaths by Emma Flint, and this was published by Picador. And the summary for this is, it's 1965 in a tight-knit working class neighbourhood in Queens, New York. And Ruth Malone, a single mother who works long hours as a cocktail waitress, wakes to discover her two small children, Frankie Jr. and Cindy, have gone missing. Later that day, Cindy's body is found in a derelict lot a half-mile from her home, strangled. 10 days later, Frankie Jr.'s decomposing body is found. Immediately all fingers point to Ruth. As police investigate the murders, the detritus of Ruth's life is exposed. Seen through the eyes of the cops, the empty bourbon bottles and provocative clothing which litter her apartment, the piles of letters from countless men and Ruth's little black book of phone numbers make her a drunk, a loose woman, and therefore a bad mother. The lead detective, a strict Catholic who believes women belong in the home, leaped to the obvious conclusion. Facing divorce and a custody battle, Malone took her children's lives. Pete Wernicke is a rookie tabloid reporter who finagles an assignment to cover the murders. Determined to make his name in the paper, he begins digging into the case. Pete's interest in the story develops into an obsession with Ruth, and he comes to believe there's something more to the woman whom prosecutors, the press, and the public have painted as a promiscuous femme fatale. Did Ruth Malone violently kill her own children? Is she a victim of circumstance? Or is there something more sinister at play? Inspired by a true story, Little Deaths, like celebrated novels by Sarah Waters and Megan Abbott, is compelling literary crime fiction that explores the capacity for good and evil in us all. So it's quite interesting that there's a thriller on the list. You don't really come across many sort of literary crime fiction books that are really well written, and this sounds like it's going to be a really good story, and I love me a thriller, so that sounds really interesting to me. So that's Little Deaths by Emma Flint. The next one on the list is The Mare by Mary Gateskill, and this has been published by Serpent's Tail. And this is about the story of a Dominican girl, the white woman who introduces her to riding, and the horse who changes everything for her. Velveteen Vargas is 11 years old, a fresh air fund kid from Brooklyn. Her host family is a couple in upstate New York. Ginger, a failed artist on the fringe of Alcoholics Anonymous, and Paul, an academic who wonders what it will mean to make a difference in such a contrived situation. The Mare illuminates the couple's changing relationship with Velvet over the course of several years, as well as Velvet's powerful encounter with the horses at the stable down the road, as Gateskill weaves together Velvet's vital inner city community and the privileged country world of Ginger and Paul. I love that name, Velveteen Vargas. That's just such an incredible name. This one sounds really good. It sounds like it's going to be, again, sort of clash of cultures, inner city versus the countryside, that sort of thing, and that sounds really interesting. The next one on the list is The Dark Circle by Linda Grant, and this was published by Virago. And the summary for this one is, the Second World War is over, a new decade is beginning, but for an East End teenage brother and sister living on the edge of the law, life has been suspended. Sent away to a tuberculosis sanatorium in Kent to learn the way of the patient, they find themselves in the company of Army and Air Force officers, a car salesman, a young university graduate, a mysterious German woman, a member of the aristocracy, and an American merchant seaman. They discover that a cure is tantalisingly just out of reach, and only by inciting wholesale rebellion can freedom be snatched. So we've got kind of like the backdrop of the end of the Second World War, we've got some stuff about kind of people from different walks of life, and finding a cure for a terrible disease. So that sounds really interesting. The next one on the list is a book called The Letter Bohemians by Amir McBride, and this was published by Faber and Faber. And this says, the captivating new novel from Amir McBride, critically acclaimed and Bailey's Women's Prize-winning author of A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing. Upon her arrival in London, an 18-year-old Irish girl begins anew as a drama student, with all the hopes of any young actress searching for the fame she's always dreamed of. She struggles to fit in. She's young and unexotic, a naive new girl. But soon she forges friendships and finds a place for herself in the big city. Then she meets an attractive older man. He's an established actor, 20 years older, and the inevitable clamorous relationship that ensues is one that will change her forever. A redemptive, captivating story of passion and innocence set across the bedsits of mid-1990s London, McBride holds new love under her fierce gaze, giving us all a chance to remember what it's like to fall hard for another. So we've got this kind of thing going on with an older man, or sort of the age gap when it comes to romance, which sounds quite interesting, but also the backdrop of 1990s London, which is sort of a period that I've not read any fiction in before, as it's so close to home. You know, I was growing up, I was a teenager in, you know, the mid-1990s, so yeah, an era that I will remember quite clearly. And one that will be interesting to read a book about, I suppose. Next on the list is a book called Midwinter by Fiona Melrose, and this was published by Corsair. And this says, father and son, Landin and Vale Midwinter, are men of the land, Suffolk farmers. Times are hard and they struggle to sustain their property, their livelihood and their heritage in the face of competition from big businesses. But an even bigger, more brutal fight is brewing. A fight between each other about the horrible death of Cecilia, beloved wife and mother, in Zambia 10 years earlier. A past they have both refused to confront until now. Over the course of a particularly mauling Suffolk winter, Landin and Vale grapple with their memories and their pain, raking over what remains of their fragile family unit, constantly at odds and under threat of falling apart forever. While Vale makes increasingly desperate decisions, Landin retreats, finding solace in the land, his animals, and a fox who haunts the farm and seems to bring with her both comfort and protection. Alive to language and nature, Midwinter is a novel about guilt, blame and lost opportunities. Ultimately, it is a story about love and the lengths we go to find our way home. So I think the backdrop of that particular novel sounds really interesting. And you've got sort of like the brutal landscape, the animals, the relationship between father and son, the abilities to cope with grief. Yeah, so that sounds good. Next one on the list is The Sport of Kings by C.E. Morgan, and this was published by Fourth Estate. And this says, Hellsmouth, a willful, thoroughbred filly, has the legacy of a family riding on her. The Forges, one of the oldest and proudest families in Kentucky, descended from the first settlers to brave the Wilderness Road. As mythic as the history of the South itself, and now first-time horse breeders. Through an act of naked ambition, Henry Forge is attempting to blaze this new path on the family's crop farm. His daughter Henrietta becomes his partner in the endeavour, but has desires of her own. When Alman Shugnesi, an African-American man fresh from prison, comes to work in the stables, the ugliness of the farm's history rears its head. Together through sheer will, the three stubbornly try to create a new future, one that isn't determined by Kentucky's bloody past, while they mould Hellsmouth into a champion. The Sport of Kings has the force of an epic, a majestic story of speed and hunger, racism and justice. This novel is an astonishment from start to finish. So this seems to be kind of based on the aftermath of kind of like civil rights and kind of breaking away from all of those horrible things that happened during that period. Yeah, and using sort of horse racing and breeding horses as a way of breaking out of that. The next one on the list is The Woman Next Door by Uwandi Omatozo, and this is published by Chateau and Windus. And this says, Hortensia James and Marion Agostino are neighbours. One is black, one white. Both are successful women with impressive careers. Both have recently been widowed. And both are sworn enemies, sharing hedge in hostility which they preen with a zeal that belies the fact that they are both over 80. But one day an unforeseen event forces the women together, and gradually the bickering and sniping softens into lively debate, and from there into memories shared. But could these sparks of connection ever transform into friendship, or is it too late to expect these two to change? So, women, culture, bringing cultures together. I don't know about that one. I don't know whether it's my cup of tea, but it might be yours. The next book I've got on the list is The Lonely Hearts Hotel by Heather O'Neill, and this is published by River Run. And this says, with echoes of the night circus, a spellbinding story about two gifted orphans in love with each other since they can remember, whose childhood talents allow them to rewrite their future. The Lonely Hearts Hotel is a love story with the power of legend. An unparalleled tale of charismatic pianos, invincible dance partners, radicalised chorus girls, drug-addicted musicians, brooding clowns, and an underworld whose economy hinges on the price of a kiss. In a landscape like this, it takes great creative gifts to thwart one's origins. It might also take love. Two babies are abandoned in a Montreal orphanage in the winter of 1910. Before long, their talents emerge. Perrault is a piano prodigy. Rose lights up even the dreariest room with her dancing and comedy. As they travel around the city performing clown routines, the children fall in love with each other and dream up a plan for the most extraordinary and seductive circus show the world has ever seen. Separated as teenagers, sent off to work as servants during the Great Depression, both descend into the city's underworld, dabbling in sex, drugs and theft in order to survive. But when Rose and Perrault finally reunite beneath the snowflakes after years of searching and desperate poverty, the possibilities of their childhood dreams are renewed, and they'll go to extreme lengths to make them come true. Soon Rose, Perrault and their troupe of clowns and chorus girls have hit New York, commanding the stage as well as the alleys, and neither the theatre nor the underworld would ever look the same. With her musical language and extravagantly realised world, Heather O'Neill enchants us with a novel so magical there is no escaping its spell. Now, you guys have heard me talk about how much I loved The Night Circus when I read it right at the end of last year, and there seems to be quite a lot of echoes of that in this particular book here. So a lot of kind of magical realism. You've got set against the backdrop of the Great Depression, which I think is a really interesting idea. So that sounds really good. Next up is a book that is the only one I actually have a copy of on my shelf, and that is The Ethical Serpent by Sarah Perry, and this was also published by Serpent's Tail. So this says on the inside, London 1893, when Cora Seaborn's husband dies, she steps into her new life as a widow with as much relief as sadness. Her marriage was not a happy one, and she never suited the role of society wife. Accompanied by her son Francis, a curious, obsessive boy, she leaves town for Essex, where she hopes fresh air and open space will provide the refuge they need. When they take lodgings in Colchester, rumours reach them from further up the estuary that the mythical Essex Serpent, once said to roam the marshes claiming human lives, has returned to the coastal paths of Old Winter. Cora, a keen amateur naturalist with no patience for religion or superstition, is immediately enthralled, convinced that what the local people think is a magical beast may be a previously undiscovered species. As she sets out on its trail, she's introduced to William Ransom, Aldwinter's vicar. Like Cora, Will is deeply suspicious of the rumours, but he thinks that they are founded on moral panic, a flight from real faith. As he tries to calm his parishioners, he and Cora strike up an intense relationship, and although they agree on absolutely nothing, they find themselves inexorably drawn together and torn apart, eventually changing each other's lives in ways entirely unexpected. Told with exquisite grace and intelligence, this novel is most of all a celebration of love and the many guises it can take. So yeah, I bought this in January and I haven't got around to reading it yet. What makes it even worse is that it's set in Essex, where I live, so I really should get around to reading this now that it's appeared on the long list for the Bailey's Prize. Next up on the list is Bark Skins by Annie Proulx, and this was published by Fourth Estate also. And this says, in the late 17th century, two penniless young Frenchmen, René Selle and Charles Duquette, arrive in New France. Bound to a feudal lord, a seigneur, for 3 years in exchange for land, they become woodcutters, bark skins. René suffers extraordinary hardship, oppressed by the forest he is charged with clearing. He's forced to marry a Miquois woman, and their descendants live trapped between two inimical cultures. But Duquette, crafty and ruthless, runs away from the seigneur, becomes a fur trader, then sets up a timber business. Proulx tells the stories of the descendants of Selle and Duquette over 300 years. Their travels across North America to Europe, China and New Zealand under stunningly brutal conditions. The revenge of rivals, accidents, pestilence, Indian attacks and cultural annihilation. Over and over again they seize what they can of a presumed infinite resource, leaving the modern day characters face to face with possible ecological collapse. I've never read anything by Annie Proulx, and yeah, I've always wanted to, and that sounds absolutely fantastic. You've got a multi-generation novel set against some really interesting cultural backdrops. It reminds me a little bit of the book that I'm currently reading, which is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, and the kind of generational thing that's going on there, so that sounds really interesting. Next up is a book called First Love by Gwendolyn Riley, and this was published by Granta, and this says, from one of Britain's most original young writers, according to The Observer, a blistering account of a marriage in crisis and a portrait of a woman caught between withdrawal and self-assertion, depression and rage. Neve, the novel's acutely intelligent narrator, is beset by financial anxiety and isolation, but can't quite manage to extricate herself from her volatile partner Edwin. Told with emotional remove and bracing clarity, First Love is an account of the relationship between two catastrophically ill-suited people, walking a precarious line between relative calm and explosive confrontation. So you've got a book centred just around a relationship there, and a pretty, a relationship that is not a particularly good one either. I'm not sure about that one. Again, I don't really feel like it would be my cup of tea. But like I said, it might be yours. Next up we have Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Thien, and this is published by Granta. And this says, in a single year my father left us twice. The first time to end his marriage, and the second when he took his own life. I was 10 years old. Master storyteller Madeleine Thien takes us inside an extended family in China, showing us the lives of two successive generations, those who lived through Mao's Cultural Revolution, and their children who became the students protesting in Tiananmen Square. At the centre of this epic story are two young women, Marie and Ai Ming. Through their relationship, Marie strives to piece together the tale of her fractured family in present-day Vancouver, seeking answers in the fragile layers of their collective story. Her quest will unveil how Kai, her enigmatic father, a talented pianist, and Ai Ming's father, the shy and brilliant composer Sparrow, along with the violin prodigy Zhu Li, were forced to reimagine their artistic and private selves during China's political campaigns, and how their fates reverberate through the years with lasting consequences. With maturity and sophistication, humour and beauty, Thien has created a novel that is at once intimate and grandly political, rooted in the details of life inside China, yet transcendent in its universality. I think that sounds really good. You've kind of got the backdrop of China, and I love reading books that are set in China, or the backdrop of China, or about Chinese culture, and that sounds really, really good. And then lastly on the list, so this is book number 16, we have the Gustafsson Sonata by Rose Tremaine, and this was published by Chateau and Windus, and this says, what is the difference between friendship and love, or between neutrality and commitment? Gustav Perley grows up in a small town in neutral Switzerland, where the horrors of the Second World War seem a distant echo. But Gustav's father has mysteriously died, and his adored mother, Emily, is strangely cold and indifferent to him. Gustav's childhood is spent in lonely isolation, His only toy a tin train with painted passengers staring blankly from the carriage windows. As time goes on, an intense friendship with a boy of his own age, Anton Zweibel, begins to define Gustav's life. Jewish and mercurial, a talented pianist tortured by nerves when he has to play in public, Anton fails to understand how deeply and irrevocably his life and Gustav's are entwined. Fierce, astringent, profoundly tender, Rose Tremaine's beautifully orchestrated novel asks the question, what does it do to a person, or to a country, to pursue an eternal quest for neutrality and self-mastery, while all life's hopes and passions continually press upon the borders and beat upon the gate? So again, we've got kind of like the backdrop of the end of the Second World War, something that's set in Switzerland, which I've never read before. Rose Tremaine is a pretty prolific female writer. I've never read anything by her before, but that sounds like it'll be a good place to start. So there you go, guys. They were all the 16 books that are on the long list for the Bailey's Prize. Having gone through what they're all about, I would say the ones that I'm most interested in are the Ethical Serpent, which of course I've bought a copy of and I've had on my shelf for a couple of months now. Do Not Say We Have Nothing, I think sounds pretty fantastic. The Lonely Hearts Hotel has particularly piqued my interest for the kind of magical realism bits and pieces in there. And also Little Deaths by Emma Flynn. I do like a good thriller, and a thriller that's really well written, and the kind of the themes that seem to be present in that particular one sound really, really fantastic. And the other one I would say is Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. I really like the sound of that as well. So, have you guys read any of these on this long list? If you have, what did you think of them? Is there one on this list that you think is, you know, likely to be the winner? What do you think of this long list that's been produced? I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.